In 1978, China was one of the poorest countries on the face of the earth. The average Chinese citizen earned less than $1 a day. Famine was a living memory. Cities were crumbling, and the rest of the world had largely written China off as a nation that would never rise above its suffering. But something happened, something extraordinary, something that the world had never seen before in all of human history that in less than 50 years. Not centuries, not decades upon decades, but just 50 short years, China transformed itself into the second largest economy on the planet. It lifted 800 million people out of poverty. It became the world's largest manufacturer, the world's largest trader, and one of the most powerful military forces on Earth. How does a nation go from extreme poverty to global superpower in a single lifetime? What decisions were made? What sacrifices were demanded? And what does China's unstoppable rise mean for the rest of the world? This is the story of China, the most dramatic national transformation in human history. And it is a story that is far from over. To understand how China rose so fast, we must first understand what China actually is. And China is not just a country. China is a civilization, one of the oldest, most complex, and most enduring civilizations the world has ever produced. For over 4,000 years, China was the most advanced society on Earth. Chinese inventors gave the world paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass, for inventions that fundamentally changed the course of human history. The Silk Road, the ancient trading network that connected China to the Middle East, Africa, and Europe, made China the economic center of the known world for centuries. At its peak during the Tang and Song dynasties, China accounted for nearly 30% of the entire world's economic output. China wasn't rising, China was already at the top. The question historians still debate today is not how China rose, but why it fell, and how it found its way back. Because between the 1800s and the mid-1900s, China suffered what the Chinese call their century of humiliation. Opium wars forced upon them by Britain, territory seized by foreign powers, internal rebellions that killed tens of millions, and then the brutal Japanese invasion of World War II, which left scars on the Chinese national consciousness that still shape policy decisions today. By the time Mao Zedong proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, the country was exhausted, broken, and desperately poor. But a fire had been lit. China would never be humiliated again. The question was, what would it take to ensure that? Mao Zedong was one of the most consequential leaders of the 20th century. A revolutionary, a poet, a military genius, and a man whose economic experiments would bring unimaginable suffering to hundreds of millions of people. In 1958, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward, an ambitious attempt to rapidly transform China from an agricultural society into a modern communist superpower. Farmers were forced off their land and into industrial communes. Steel production was made a national obsession. Backyard furnaces popped up across the country as citizens melted down their farming tools to meet steel quotas. The result was catastrophic. With farmers gone and tools melted, crops failed across China. Between 1959 and 1961, somewhere between 15 million and 55 million people starved to death in what became the deadliest famine in human history. It was a man-made disaster of incomprehensible scale. Then came the Cultural Revolution. From 1966 to 1976, Mao unleashed a campaign to purge so-called enemies of the revolution. Schools closed, universities shut down, intellectuals, teachers, doctors and artists were sent to labor camps for re-education. An entire generation lost their education. China's professional class was decimated. When Mao died in 1976, China was politically exhausted and economically stagnant. The communist ideology that was supposed to lift China to greatness had instead kept it trapped in poverty. The Soviet model wasn't working. Something had to change. And that change came in the form of one small, determined man who had survived everything Mao had thrown at him. Deng Xiaoping stood at just 5 feet tall. He had been purged twice during the Cultural Revolution, stripped of power, humiliated, sent to work in a factory. His son was thrown from a building by Red Guards and paralyzed for life. Deng had every reason to be bitter. Instead, he chose to be pragmatic. When Deng consolidated power in 1978, he made a declaration that would echo through history. He said, "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice." In other words, ideology didn't matter. Results did. China was going to do whatever worked. And what worked was capitalism, carefully, selectively, strategically introduced into a communist system. Deng's first move was to create special economic zones, areas where foreign companies could invest, where market forces could operate, and where Chinese workers could earn wages in a way that was completely forbidden everywhere else in the country. The first zones were set up in Shenzhen, a small fishing village near Hong Kong. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Foreign investment poured in. Factories went up overnight. Workers flooded in from rural areas. Within a decade, Shenzhen had transformed from a fishing village into a booming industrial city. It was proof of concept. The model worked. Deng then opened up agriculture. Farmers were allowed to sell surplus crops on the open market for the first time. Food production surged. Rural incomes rose. The countryside, which had been starving just years earlier, began to stabilize and then thrive. Deng Xiaoping understood something that most communist leaders refused to accept, that human beings are naturally entrepreneurial. Give people the freedom to work for themselves, to keep what they earn, to build something of their own, and they will move mountains. China's mountains were about to move. Look around wherever you are right now. Your phone, your shoes, your furniture, the clothes you are wearing. There is a very good chance that all of them, or most of them, were made in China. This did not happen by accident. It was the result of one of the most deliberate and effective economic strategies in modern history. Through the 1980s and 1990s, China made itself the most attractive manufacturing destination on Earth. Wages were low. The workforce was enormous and disciplined. Infrastructure was being built at breathtaking speed. And the government made it easy, sometimes suspiciously easy, for foreign companies to set up factories. American companies came first, then European, then Japanese, then Korean. They brought their products, their technology, and their supply chains, and they handed them to China. In exchange for access to cheap manufacturing, Western companies taught China how to build everything. And China was an extraordinarily fast learner. The defining moment came in 2001 when China joined the World Trade Organization. Suddenly, Chinese goods could flow into every market on Earth with reduced tariffs and trade barriers. The floodgates opened. Chinese exports exploded. In the decade after joining the WTO, China's share of global manufacturing went from 8% to over 20%. It was the fastest industrial expansion the world had ever seen. By 2010, China had overtaken Japan to become the world's second largest economy. By 2013, it was the world's largest trading nation. And the engine driving all of this was something deceptively simple: hundreds of millions of Chinese people working incredibly hard for a better life. If China's economic rise is staggering, its infrastructure transformation is simply mind-bending. China has built more infrastructure in the last 30 years than the rest of the world combined built in the same period. And that is not an exaggeration. China's high-speed rail network is the largest on Earth. Over 40,000 kilometers of track connecting virtually every major city in the country. Trains that travel at 350 kilometers per hour. Journeys that once took 12 hours by slow train now take 2 hours. China built more high-speed rail in 15 years than the rest of the world built in 50. Then there are the highways. China now has the world's largest highway network. Over 160,000 kilometers of expressways, surpassing even the United States. And the ports, the 10 largest container ports in the world, 7 of them are in China. The scale is almost incomprehensible. And the cities. China has built entire cities from scratch, not expanded existing ones, but built brand new cities on empty land. Cities with populations of millions, complete with skyscrapers, universities, hospitals, and metro systems that simply did not exist 20 years ago. No other country in human history has urbanized at this speed or scale. How did China build all of this so fast? The answer is a combination of state power, cheap capital, and sheer political will. The Chinese government could decide to build a high-speed rail line and have it operational in 3 years. No environmental reviews lasting a decade. No community opposition holding things up for years. The state decided and the state delivered. Whether that is admirable or terrifying depends entirely on your perspective. For years, the world dismissed Chinese technology companies as mere copycats. China had its own version of Google, Baidu, its own version of Amazon, Alibaba, its own version of WhatsApp, WeChat. The joke in Silicon Valley was that China could copy but could not create. Nobody is laughing anymore. Today, Chinese technology companies are not copying the West, they are leading it. Huawei's 5G technology is so advanced that the United States government has tried to ban it from allied countries out of fear of being left behind. TikTok, owned by the Chinese company ByteDance, has conquered the world's attention in a way that no American social media company has ever managed. And China's electric vehicle industry, led by BYD, has overtaken Tesla and is now flooding global markets with affordable, high-quality electric cars. In artificial intelligence, China has set a national target to become the world's leading AI power by 2030. With the world's largest population generating the world's largest datasets, and a government willing to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in AI research, that target is looking increasingly realistic. And in space, China has built its own space station, landed rovers on the Moon and Mars, and has announced plans for a crewed lunar mission before the end of this decade. The space race that America thought it had won 50 years ago is very much back on. But China's rise has not come without cost. And it is important, it is essential that we are honest about this. The environmental destruction caused by China's rapid industrialization has been catastrophic. For decades, Chinese cities choked under some of the worst air pollution ever recorded in human history. Rivers ran toxic with industrial waste. Entire ecosystems were destroyed in the rush to build and manufacture. China is now the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, And while it has made genuine progress on renewable energy, the damage done to its natural environment will take generations to undo. Then there is the question of political freedom. China's economic miracle has been achieved under a one-party system that tolerates no meaningful political opposition. The Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989, where the government sent tanks against its own citizens who were peacefully protesting for democracy, remains one of the defining moments of modern Chinese history, a moment the government has worked very hard to erase from public memory. Today, China operates one of the most sophisticated surveillance states in human history. Facial recognition cameras on every corner. A social credit system that monitors citizen behavior. The internet heavily censored and controlled. Free speech, the freedom to criticize the government, simply does not exist. And the situation in Xinjiang, where over 1 million Uyghur Muslims have been detained in what the Chinese government calls re-education camps and what much of the world calls something far darker, has created an international human rights crisis that continues to this day. These are not small footnotes in China's story. They are central chapters. And any honest documentary about China's rise must reckon with them honestly. China's rise has fundamentally reshaped the global order. For 70 years after World War II, the world operated on a simple assumption: America was the dominant superpower, and everyone else played by American rules. China's rise has shattered that assumption. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China has invested over $1 trillion in infrastructure across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe, building ports, railways, and roads that connect the world to China and cement Chinese influence in over 140 countries. Critics call it debt trap diplomacy. Supporters call it the largest development program in human history. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. The relationship between China and the United States has become the defining geopolitical rivalry of the 21st century. Trade wars, technology battles, military tensions in the South China Sea and around Taiwan. The two superpowers are locked in a competition that will shape the future of the entire world. And unlike the Cold War, which was a rivalry between two systems that rarely traded with each other, the US-China rivalry happens between two economies so deeply intertwined that fully separating them may be impossible. The rise of China is the defining story of our time. It is a story of extraordinary human achievement, of hundreds of millions of people lifting themselves from poverty through sheer determination. It is a story of visionary leadership and catastrophic mistakes, of economic genius and human rights failures, of a civilization reclaiming its place in the world after a century of humiliation. China faces enormous challenges ahead: a slowing economy, a demographic crisis caused by decades of the one-child policy, a property sector teetering on collapse, growing international isolation over its political system, and the fundamental question of whether a country can continue to grow richer while remaining politically unfree. But if the last 50 years have taught us anything, it is this: never underestimate China. A nation that was written off as hopeless in 1978 and is now challenging American supremacy in 2024 has earned the right to be taken seriously. Whatever happens next, the world will be shaped by China's choices. And China's story, 4,000 years old and still unfolding, is far from finished. This has been Globe Docs, where we document the world one nation at a time. If this documentary opened your eyes, hit subscribe, because every week we take you somewhere new. The world is waiting. Let's explore it together.